changing gears a bit, what is applied behavior analysis? We've been talking about, oh, the research says it's great, oh, it helps kids. What is it? For those of you who don't have a textbook definition. This isn't a textbook definition, this comes from one of my colleagues. ABA is a treatment program comprised of curriculum, targeting, language and communication, social interactions, imitation and play, motor skills, cognitive academic skills, and others, including literacy, numeracy, eating, sleeping, toileting, life skills, using empirically validated teaching procedures for skill acquisition, while reducing problem behavior and focusing on transitioning and generalizing skills to the natural environment. I picked that example because it's pretty all-encompassing, right? It defines, for those of you behavior analysts, I see some nods, like, yeah, that's what we do, right? And this is really what a good education program does. It has a curriculum that's all-encompassing. It's one of the lingering legacies from the early intervention research that shows if you target singular things, you can make great progress on those singular things, but there probably won't be spontaneous, miraculous generalization to any other areas of their development. The research tells us that we should be targeting all areas of development simultaneously for the best outcomes. And so you see that reflected, this is an empirical legacy reflected in a curriculum that addresses all areas of development and things important to families. Empirically validating teaching procedures, right? That's our science-based strategies, and plug those into that section of the IEP. And then making sure that it maintains and it generalizes, because a lesson that doesn't maintain and generalize is a wasted lesson, right? How ABA looks at teaching? Well, there's different kind of philosophical approaches to looking at our students and how they can change over time and learn. Is genetics helpful to us as educators? Not at all. Right? There's fantastic like science fiction type research going on around the world, including in Toronto at BC Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. Dr. Stephen Shearer is a world-renowned geneticist working there. And if you talk to Dr. Shearer, he envisions a future where every baby in Canada within hours of being born will have a cheek swab taken and they'll identify predictors of autism, right? On the first day of life. That's the genetic future. It's like science fiction. They're making such rapid progress, but one of the challenges with the genetic progress is the more they find out about the genetics of autism, the more complicated the genetics of autism is. I think roughly 10 to 12% of autism can now be genetically identified, and there's multiple gene interactions, right? It's very complicated. And so it's great that they're making this progress. Anytime soon is this going to lead to a breakthrough in the school system where you're going to have gene therapy to solve autism? Probably not. And what I compare it to is Down syndrome. Down syndrome is trisomy 21, right? 3 of chromosome 21. We've known that for a really long time. Compared to autism, it's genetically simple. Is there a genetic therapy for Down syndrome? There isn't. Right? And so if there isn't a genetic solution to a genetically simple problem, then that's not going to happen in the autism world anytime soon. What that means for us as educators is, in the meantime, we just have to do good teaching, right? Because regardless of their genetics, we know that these kids can learn, and they can learn quite a bit. We can also look at past experiences. So current behaviors are acquired and maintained through reinforcement. Right? We know this is true. It's important, right? I need to know, what's been happening in his future. But what's happened in his future, what happened in school last year, isn't necessarily what's going to happen in school this year. Because the most important thing as an educator is the immediate environment. What's surrounding the student right now, right? Oh, well, in the past he was doing this. I'm not that concerned about the past. I'm concerned about what's happening in the current environment because that's what we can control and that's what we can influence and that's where behavior change can occur. So the setting is important, right? That's your special education setting, your general classroom setting, the school setting, the people and what they do. Us as educators, and as parents, we are the critically important variable because we are there in the present environment, in the immediate environment. Okay? And then what they're doing, the activities, the curriculum, all of that is the current environment. That is the most important part. And so that's what we focus on. We don't get too bogged down in worrying about the past. Right? The past is not necessarily going to predict the future. Right? Many of you have worked with kids where I know some of you in the audience right now where you're thinking, remember 2 years ago? Do you remember how hard it was? And how much better it is now? And we couldn't have predicted that back then, but it's so much better. Right? The immediate environment is the most important thing. Don't get too bogged down by the past. So the good news is we control the educational environment. And the more we know and the more we can control it, the more we can maximize learning. So that brings us to the ABCs of behavior. You guys are all familiar with the ABCs, but let me put it in the context of how this is important for teaching and learning. So you've got your antecedent, behavior, and consequence. The antecedent is what immediately precedes a behavior, and we're talking about school, we're talking about the teacher's instruction, the expectation, what we want the student to do. And then the behavior is the desired learning response, right? If I say, if you're a boy, line up, then the boys lining up is the desired behavior. That's the correct response. And then the consequence is what happens immediately after. And we don't put enough emphasis on the consequences, on positive reinforcement in particular. If a behavior occurs and is not captured by a reinforcing consequence, it's probably not going to persist in the future, right? Those are those lost opportunities where you have to be sensitive to the moment. If your student does something that you really like, capture it with reinforcement or risk losing it. So look at the teaching interaction and think about what the student does and then what we do. We manage the antecedents, we manage the consequences, which means the vast majority of what happens in a teaching interaction rests with the teacher. We've got huge power and control and opportunity. This is opportunity for teaching because we exert 2/3 of the influence over the learning interactions. So some examples of the ABC across the school grades. So in preschool, teacher says, "What's this?" Pointing to her ear, that's the antecedent. And then the child says, "Ear," and the teacher says, "Yes, my dear, that is my ear." Very good, right? That can be done one-on-one with a child, and you can do labeling body parts that way, ABC. It can be done with the class. "Hey, everybody, I forgot something that goes on my head. What do I put on my head?" And everyone says, "A hat." Very good, it is a hat, right? That was a group ABC interaction. Thank you for participating in that. All teaching interactions from preschool through university actually follow an ABC pattern. Right? If you want to simplify learning, this is what it comes down to. Moving on to kindergarten. Kindergarten teacher says, if you are a boy, stand up and quietly go get your coat for recess. Right? And just the boys get up and go and get their coats for recess. And the teacher says, "Good listening, gentlemen." And by the way, good listening, ladies as well, because you didn't get up when I said just the boys get up. Right? That was a clear antecedent, the group behavior, and then the consequence, acknowledging that they did the right thing. Grade 6. Who completed their ancient civilizations projects last night? That's the instruction from the teacher, and 28 of the hands go up, right? Very good. Teacher says, "Well done, class. Those of you who didn't raise your hand, come see me at recess," right? Maybe those of you who put your hands up, you get to go up for recess 5 minutes early. Thank you for completing your ancient civilizations project. That's an ABC interaction. Moving forward to grade 12. Special education teacher with a student with autism in grade 12. The teacher says, "What will you do if you miss your bus stop on the way to work experience?" And the student says, "I'll get off at the next stop and I'll walk back." Exactly. And text your boss and say that you're almost there. Right? That's an ABC interaction. So you can see how these are ubiquitous across the schooling years. So this ABC interaction, how does it benefit you as the teacher, the writer of the IEP, the implementer of the IEP? So you examine antecedents and consequences to determine how and why the student behavior occurs. And this analysis will allow you to understand why desired behaviors are occurring. Right? This student is getting really clear instructions. He's doing the right thing, and he's getting meaningful consequences, and he keeps doing the right thing. Or maybe the instructions aren't clear, and he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. And even if he does, he's not getting paid off for it. And that analysis will show why he's not doing the right thing. Right? So this is a really parsimonious, simplistic, but very effective analysis. And this is one of the ways that we can keep our problems small. I'll talk a bit more about that tomorrow. But if you've got a student who's really frustrating you, just look at the ABCs around his behavior because we have a role to play there. Right? By changing what we do before and after, we change the student's behavior, and that's what leads to learning. This interaction is the essential component of teaching. And one of the things that I really stress in the courses I teach is the word teaching over the word learning. We hear a lot in media and in our society about learning, student learning. What I really want to hear as a behavioral educator is much more emphasis on teaching, right? Because teaching leads to learning. Learning doesn't occur in the absence of good teaching, or it's kind of removing the emphasis and the responsibility of the teacher and kind of putting everything on the student to be doing the learning. And with our students, we know that in the absence of our interventions, they're not going to be on a developmental pathway that's going to lead them into a desired route. So we have to be focusing on our teaching to get them where we want them to go. So this is powerful, right? This is an optimistic message. Teacher controls antecedent, teacher controls consequence, the student does the response in the middle, right? We bookend it with what we can control. This isn't in your handout either, right? I see some of you writing that down. So you do the math. This is an optimistic message. We control 2/3 of the teaching interactions, right? Hooray for us. We need to learn more about how to be managing those antecedents and consequences to benefit our students. And tomorrow we'll talk a lot about that in the context of addressing problem behavior.